you're doing a good enough job. Whether things get left behind this year or whether you're able to do them, they don't tell a story about you. They might tell a story about what your life looks like right now. The story about my life right now is things are a little bit crazy. Just because we missed, 3 major Christmas events, that doesn't mean that I'm a bad mom. That doesn't mean that I am not paying enough attention. It doesn't mean that I don't care enough. And it definitely doesn't mean that all of the moms before me were better or all of my mom friends are doing a better job than I am. Welcome back to the Happiness and Progress podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Craig. I'm an Emmy Award-winning journalist, a mom, wife, and you know what I like to say, just a person looking for more joy in the everyday. This podcast is brought to you by the new HIP courses. You can find live courses that you can be part of at daniellecraig.com in the shop. I will have 2 coming up for you in January, including the one that was planned for December. We're going to talk about that actually in this podcast episode. So hold your horses. We're going to get there. Okay. So in this episode, we are going to talk about expectations. We are about 2 weeks away from Christmas right now, and expectations can be very, very heavy load to have to carry when we are going through something where we have really high expectations. And a lot of times that is the holidays. So expectations in the holidays can make a stress-fueled time for us. However, I am a type A personality, and as much as I don't want to hold myself to expectations that are unattainable, it's really hard for me to just loosey-goosey go with the flow through a holiday. That's not my style. So I want to find a happy medium where I can have hope for a holiday and I can have a desire to take part in traditions and a desire to do really fun things. However, have enough grace for myself that when those things don't meet my expectations, I can go with the flow. When I was pregnant with my first baby, like first first moms do, I had a very elaborate birth plan. And I typed this whole thing out, and it wasn't a binder that I did bring that I brought not only to the OB's office before I went into labor, but also to the hospital to give to my labor and delivery nurses. Actually, it was my husband's job to make sure everyone got copies of the plan. He did a great job. But as I was preparing this and as I was putting together this plan, over and over and over again, people kept saying to me, "Oh, you can't have those expectations. Don't have a birth plan. It's ridiculous. What's the point of expectations?" And even back then, I decided that I could simultaneously understand that birth plans don't always go as planned, but also have a desire to have a plan and put together a plan. So I did put together a plan. You know what? It went pretty much as I had hoped, but there were bumps in the road and things were a little bit different than I had expected. But because beforehand I had made a decision that I was going to have enough go with the flow that I could give myself grace when I didn't do things how I'd hoped I would do them. I was prepared for that, and I was prepared that things would be a little bit different, and I was able to get through that without having expectations that were maybe some expectations that were unattainable, but when they were not reached, I was able to recalibrate. So I had gone into my birth plan with expectations, yes, but also because of all these warnings from everyone, flexibility, and the understanding that I was going to give myself a little grace if things didn't go as planned. So birth plan went pretty well. I was flexible throughout it. I gave myself grace throughout it. Then we got to the second part of my stay at the hospital. Which was nursing, breastfeeding. And I had a plan for how breastfeeding was going to go. I read a whole book about it that gave me exactly what this was going to look like. And I really wasn't talking to a lot of people about that as much as I was talking about my birth plan. So I really didn't get any warnings of like, hey, by the way, sometimes breastfeeding also does not go as planned. So I went in there with this plan that I was going to breastfeed my child. It was going to work perfectly. In fact, this book that I read even told me, like, if it wasn't working, what the nurses would say and how they would try to push formula on me, and how I would exactly what I would say and how I would fight for my kid. And so I really went in there actually with what my son's therapist calls a rock brain. So I went in there with a rock brain. I was not flexible. Things were not going to change. I was like concrete on what was going to happen with my plan. There was no flexibility here. So it it is time to initiate planned breastfeeding. You know what? It's the worst. None of it went as planned. Like, you start with the latch, that's a disaster. And then you start with like your supply, that's a disaster. Literally every part of this experience was a disaster for me. So much so that the nurses, this is crazy, they started saying what the book was saying they were gonna say. They're like, "Hey, your baby needs to eat. We need to give him formula." And I'm like, "Oh, the book warned me about nurses like you. No, I will not be feeding him formula. Imma keep doing what I'm doing that's not working." And so at least 24 hours go by, but I kinda think maybe it was 48. I think it was 2 days. And this baby has not eaten anything at all. I have stuck to the plan of the book, not flexible at all. Um, we knew there was a problem. He wasn't doing okay. I'm trying to remember. I'd have to look back in my notes. It might have even been the 3rd day. They notice when they're trying to discharge us, they notice that my son is shaking. He's shaking because his blood sugar is so low because he's ingested nothing for 3 days. And they had to take him to the NICU and give him formula and all the things that his little tiny body needed, that my rock brain breastfeeding plan was not giving him. And so the difference between how I walked in to my birth plan and how I walked into my breastfeeding plan was not expectations, really. It was just the addition of flexibility and grace in the birth plan. In the breastfeeding plan, it was only expectations. That's all that existed there. So now that we've talked way more about breastfeeding than I wanted to, it is just so difficult. And you really don't know until you're a woman going through that experience how hard that is and how emotionally grueling it is when it's not working out. So I see you if you've gone through that journey and that's been hard for you. So when it comes to the holidays, I want us to enter the holidays, yes, with expectations and traditions and hopes and all the things that we love. But when things go awry, I want us to have the flexibility that we'll be able to go with the flow on it. And that's what my son's therapist always talks about, the squishy brain. She has one of those little stress ball brains that you can kind of squish. So we're just trying to move from must be this way, has to be this way, or it's a failure and I'm a failure and I've totally messed up Christmas, to like, oh, darn it, this didn't happen. What am I going to do next? How can I move through this? So our last 3 weeks have been insane. The week of Thanksgiving, my son got a cold and he only gets asthma when he has a cold. And so this cold comes on and he's starting to develop asthma. He's wheezing, all the things. We're giving him his inhaler and it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse until finally on the day after Thanksgiving, when we were supposed to be traveling. Actually, it was 2 days after Thanksgiving, Saturday, the day we were supposed to be traveling home from my in-laws' house. He literally cannot breathe. Like, he is in such bad shape. He's a totally ghost white, can hardly talk, all of the things. And so we take him in and he has to get help there. But also our first hiccup of our trip was we were not going to be able to go home on Saturday. We were going to have to wait a day because they needed to get him stable before we could be on a road trip. And that was really frustrating. We had an expectation of being able to leave at a certain time, but we were able to we had to go with the flow. We had to be flexible. We had to be okay with the fact that our Thanksgiving plans were going to be a little different than we had planned. The week after, so December, the week after we get into December, you guys, December is nothing but expectations and plans and traditions and all of the things that this month is. there are parties, there's cookie making and gingerbread making and seeing Santa and all of singing in a choir. There's all of these things that are really important to us. And for us this month, most of those things have just we've not been able to take part in them. So the week after that happened with my son going to the hospital for asthma, my other son nearly chopped off his entire fingertip in a door about 30 minutes before we were going to see Santa. So there goes another expectation. There goes another plan right out the window. Um but it didn't have to be the end of the world because well, one, we were really, really grateful that my son got to keep his finger. The next weekend after that, I was planning to teach a course, the Reels Memory Maker course. I was going to teach that live. It was going to be really fun, really exciting. But by Wednesday, my son's finger had developed an infection, and I found myself like treating that. I was in a lot of stress over that. And I decided to hold off on the Memory Maker course. Thank goodness I did, because that coming Saturday, little did I know I was not going to be able to speak. I literally lost my voice. I ended up in urgent care to get some antibiotics for strep. That's not even because of the strep, I also missed a couples party with my husband. I also missed a party that my entire family was invited to, a breakfast pajama party that was going to be really fun. Those were the expectations I had. They were not met. So how can I move forward and be okay with the fact that those things have not been met? It's December 15th and my Christmas tree is not up. Why? Because we spent the last 3 weeks dealing with medical issues. But that's okay. The expectation is there. The expectation was that we'd have the Christmas tree up for 2 weeks at least. We're not really a long Christmas tree kind of family because we got a puppy and I also have 3 kids, and it can be rough. But my expectation was that I wanted to have that Christmas tree up for 2 weeks. We've already lost 5 days on that. But you know what? It's going to be okay. We're going to move forward. We're going to be flexible, and we're going to understand that things are okay even though they're not reaching our expectations. We have not yet done sugar cookies. We have not yet done gingerbread houses. In the fall, we did not make it to a pumpkin patch. We did not make it to a pumpkin patch. So what is the key? The key is to be flexible, which we've talked about, but to two, also not let this tell a story about ourselves. I think it's really easy, especially when it's a tradition, whether it's a tradition you've started in your family or if it's a tradition that has been passed down through your parents and your grandparents. It's really, really easy that if we mess up a tradition, there's a story to tell about us. We're lazy. We aren't good enough. We're not a good enough mom. We're not a fun enough mom. We're not engaged enough. We like all of these things. We just tell these stories about ourselves because we didn't meet the expectation that was started in the 1960s or whatever it is. I think it's really, really important that we don't tell ourselves those stories. You know what, you guys? We missed the pumpkin patch. In the year 2022, we missed the pumpkin patch. But guess what? We have gone to the pumpkin patch between the years 2012 and 2021. And when my kids grow up, they're not going to remember the year we didn't go to the pumpkin patch. They're going to remember that pumpkin patches were part of their October experience. It's okay. It's okay to let some of the stuff go. In fact, there was a Thanksgiving when I was a kid where my parents had trail mix. I have this memory. Oh, it was mixed nuts. I have this memory of having a mixed nuts can on the table for Thanksgiving. And when I became an adult, I was like, "Hey mom, I need this recipe and this recipe, and I'm getting the mixed nuts." And my mom's like, "You're getting mixed nuts?" And I'm like, "Yeah, we get mixed nuts for every Thanksgiving." And she's like, "What? Mixed nuts for every Thanksgiving?" And I'm like, "Yes." And she was like, "No, that's not exactly the truth." Because my memory remembered this one obscure, I think it was like 7 years old Thanksgiving where we had mixed nuts, and it was like really exciting for me, and I held on to that memory. Our kids are not and our family members and the people around us are not keeping a tally of how well we're doing at keeping up traditions. They're not. And we need to make sure that we're not keeping that tally too, that we're not putting, tallies in the L in the losing section. You're doing a good enough job. Whether things get left behind this year or whether you're able to do them, they don't tell a story about you. They might tell a story about what your life looks like right now. The story about my life right now is things are a little bit crazy. We've been in the hospital for three straight weekends. That's okay. That doesn't tell a story about me. Just because we missed, three major Christmas events, that doesn't mean that I'm a bad mom. That doesn't mean that I am not paying enough attention. It doesn't mean that I don't care enough. And it definitely doesn't mean that all of the moms before me were better or all of my mom friends are doing a better job than I am. It doesn't even mean I'm a Grinch. All it means is that things have been a little chaotic over here. And that's okay to recognize what is real, but try to walk away from letting something that doesn't meet your expectations write a story about you. It actually goes back to the breastfeeding story. I was letting not being able to breastfeed, that expectation of being able to breastfeed my kid, I was letting that turn into a story about me as a mom. I'm the worst mom ever. I can't do this. What have I gotten myself into? If I can't breastfeed, how am I going to be able to raise a child? There's something fundamentally wrong with my body. Like those were stories I was telling myself because I wasn't reaching an expectation. Okay, so we have flexibility and we have not telling ourselves stories about the things that don't reach our expectations. And finally, I think both of those things, flexibility when things don't go as planned and not writing those stories about yourself, are going to be your pathway to grace for yourself. That's how you are going to offer yourself grace, even when it's something you wanted to do for yourself. Pumpkin patch, yeah, for my kids, but it's mostly for me. I love the pumpkin patch in the fall. Um, Giving yourself that grace to know, like, you know what? It's okay if I can't accomplish that this year. It's okay if this Christmas looks a little different. It's okay. And maybe there might be specific things that you want to notice that are making this Christmas a little harder. Maybe it's your first Christmas on your own. Maybe it is your first Christmas after losing someone you love. Maybe it's your first Christmas without a pet. Maybe it's your first Christmas with, all of these medical issues that we had. Maybe it's your first Christmas after leaving a religion. Whatever it is, giving yourself that space to maybe mourn the difference that this Christmas is and offer yourself that grace to know that it's okay no matter what your holiday looks like. And I also really believe that when we give ourselves the flexibility, when we give ourselves the grace and we don't write stories about things that don't go as we planned about ourselves, that we're able to enjoy it more, that we are able to sit in the present of what the moment is. And when we're able to sit in the present, I really, really think that we're able to live there with a little more gratitude and be happy with what has shown up for us, no matter what it is, even if it is different. Even if it is fewer gifts because we've lost a job, even if it is not getting a gift from your friend that is no longer a friend that you had a falling out with, no matter what it is, if you can just sit in the present with you're here, these are the things that we're able to experience. Focusing on the gratitude, focusing on what you do have instead of the lack. Focusing on unmet expectations is so much just focusing on lack when you're able to focus instead of what you lack in this holiday and more on what you do have in front of you. So for me, for example, yes, I lacked a whole bunch of stuff. We lacked 3 really fun Christmas events. But you know what we did have? My son still had the tip of his finger. My other son was breathing. Oh my gosh, the fact that he has clear breath that he doesn't have to work hard for is a massive blessing. We have each other. We have a home, and those things keep us present. Those things keep us grateful and not living in an experience that really wasn't meant to be ours this year, 2022. And with that, I want to wish you a Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and I want to thank you for being here on Happiness and Progress. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to go subscribe and rate this podcast. I really, really appreciate it when you do that. It helps me continue to do this, and I just want to thank you for being here.